In our headlines on this Thursday, May 1st, here in South Korea. The Supreme Court overturns an appeals court ruling to acquit Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung on charges of election law violations. And acting President Han Duck-soo steps down from his current post amid widespread expectations that he will partake in the presidential race. Meanwhile, officials from South Korea will sit down with their counterparts over in the Czech Republic to officially sign a nuclear power partnership. We begin with a series of significant developments here on the local front. The Supreme Court has returned to the High Court an election law violation case against Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung. Our political correspondent Shin Ha-young is standing by live on the line with the latest. Ha-young, it's good to have you on. Now let's begin with details, Ha-young, of this latest decision by the Supreme Court.
Sure, Sunny. So the Supreme Court has sent the election law violation case of Democratic Party presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung back to the High Court. And the top court was split 10-2. And today's ruling follows an appeal by prosecutors against a High Court ruling in March that had overturned an initial guilty verdict by a local court. And in the initial verdict by Seoul Central District Court in November, it was convicted of making false statements during the previous presidential campaign. And these include denying ties to the late Kim Moon-gi, a key figure involved in a land development scandal in Seongnam during a media interview in 2021, and also false claims that there was pressure from South Korea's land ministry to rezone a research institute site in Baekhyun-dong area of Seongnam. And the top court on Thursday ruled that Lee's statements, including remarks about the Gulf trip with Kim and his remarks about the Baekhyun-dong area, are considered as spreading false information under Public Official Election Act.
Right, I see. And hi, what has been Lee Jae-myung's response to this latest ruling?
Well, Sunny, Lee Jae-myung did not appear in court today as defendants are not required to be present. However, after the ruling, he said the ruling is completely different from what he believes, adding that the will of the people is what matters most. And Lee's legal team also said that it cannot accept the ruling. And meanwhile, with the latest ruling, Lee will now face a retrial at the Seoul High Court. And since the court must follow the Supreme Court's decision, he is expected to be found guilty. And the court is expected to hold a sentencing hearing to decide Lee's sentence. And today's ruling drew much attention as it could have affected presidential frontrunner Lee's eligibility to run in the upcoming election. And with the case sent back for a retrial, his candidacy remains unaffected since the final ruling has yet to be made. However, if he is elected before the ruling, it could spark controversy over whether the trial should be paused during his term. And that's all I have for this hour. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Ha-young, thank you for that coverage. That was our political correspondent, Shin Ha-young. Also, on the political front, acting President Han Duck-soo has announced his intentions to step down from his current post. For more on this, I have our correspondent, Oh Soo-young, joining me now. Soo-young, welcome. So what exactly did he say, and what does this all mean, Soo-young?
Right, Sunny. So Han Duck-soo has indeed bowed out of his position as acting president and prime minister. In a televised address to the nation at 4 p.m., Han said he had made the final decision to resign because he believes there's another task for him to do to help South Korea overcome an economic crisis and a deep political division within the country. Between the choice of continuing to fulfill his current duties and taking on a greater responsibility, Han said he would step down from his current role. This comes just over a month before the early presidential election and 3 days before public officials are required to quit if they wish to run. Now, this shifts the country's leadership for the fourth time since President Yoon Suk-yeol was suspended from office last year, then removed early last month. Finance Minister Choi Sang-mok, who took charge while Han went through his own impeachment trial, will once again serve as acting president. The new government will take office from June 4th, the day after the election, without a transition team.
Right. Now, Soo-young, well before his decision to step down this afternoon, rumors had been rampant about Han's potential participation in the presidential race, right? What have you been hearing?
Well, Han's expected to announce his candidacy on Friday and launch operations on Saturday, with some of his aides from the Prime Minister's office joining his campaign. Now, he's said to have an office ready already near the National Assembly in Yeouido, Seoul. And for weeks, the 75-year-old bureaucrat has reportedly been urged by moderate conservatives within the People Power Party to enter the race, as the PPP's reputation suffers after former President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law and was removed from office. Now, in this situation, Han is believed to be the most viable counterweight to the majority-holding Democratic Party's candidate, Lee Jae-myung, who currently leads the polls. Those in favour of Han cite his experience as Prime Minister under both Liberal and Conservative governments, as well as Finance Minister and Ambassador to the US. Now, critics say that Han was part of the impeached Yoon administration and that he should focus on organising a smooth election, not running in it. Well, we're going to have to see whether he runs and what lies ahead for Han. But for now, we have 33 days until voters head to the polls, and that's plenty of time for more surprising twists and turns. Back to you, Sonny.
All right, Soo-young, thank you for that report, and do keep us posted. The government, meanwhile, is a step closer to securing a supplementary budget that it seeks to bolster exports, advance disaster recovery and support vulnerable groups. Our correspondent Moon Hae-ryun reports.
South Korea has taken a major step towards finalizing its first supplementary budget in 3 years, and the first drafted under an acting president. The two main political parties reached an agreement on Thursday to expand the package to 13.8 trillion Korean won, roughly $9.6 billion, up from the government's original 12.2 trillion won proposal. The plan still needs final approval in the National Assembly. The budget targets three main priorities: disaster recovery, boosting exports and strategic technologies, and supporting vulnerable communities. A major driver of the budget's expansion is the response to devastating wildfires, which prompted an additional 200 billion won for disaster relief. This will help double the National Disaster Reserve and upgrade emergency equipment such as drones and AI surveillance systems. As global trade tensions and export slowdowns persist, the budget allocates 4 trillion won for high-tech industries, including policy financing, export programs, and AI semiconductor investment. Another key addition is 400 billion won for regional gift certificates, aimed at boosting consumption in small businesses and traditional markets. Funding for agricultural discounts has been expanded, along with scholarships for university students. With the IMF reducing South Korea's 2025 growth outlook to 1%, more funds have been directed to construction projects to stimulate domestic demand. Experts say this could be vital for job creation and economic recovery.
Reviving the construction sector can have a strong ripple effect. It helps boost employment among low-income, unskilled workers and contributes to faster recovery in domestic demand.
The supplementary budget also targets small businesses and vulnerable groups. Measures include a new burden relief credit for electricity and insurance bills, traditional market vouchers, and expanded loans for students and low-income youth. This emergency budget may serve as a stepping stone for more extensive fiscal action later this year. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
South Korea and the Czech Republic are scheduled to sit down next Wednesday in Prague to officially seal a nuclear power deal, raising hopes here for greater inroads into the European market. Our Lee Soo-jin has details.
South Korea has been officially confirmed as the contractor for the Czech Republic's new nuclear power plant project. Czech Prime Minister Petr Fiala said on Wednesday that a contract to build 2 reactors at the Dukovany power plant will be signed with the state-run Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power on May 7th. This comes as the Czech government announced that it will take an 80% stake in a subsidiary of a state-run energy company CEZ in charge of construction to finance the project, resolving one of the key hurdles to finalizing the nuclear power deal with Korea. CEZ had been pursuing alternative financing options after the government expanded the project from a single unit to 2, estimated to cost more than 26 trillion won, or around $18 billion. The project marks the first export of a nuclear power plant by a South Korean company since the Baraka nuclear plant in the United Arab Emirates in 2009.
Korean companies and Korean government has come to establish very strong reputations because they successfully moved into the European market. We have struggled with the nuclear power plant due to our political tensions, but now this market is recovered due to heavy demand for AI and also war between Ukraine and Russia.
And if the Czech government later confirms plans to add 2 new units to the Temelin nuclear power plant, Korea is expected to be granted priority negotiation rights for that project too. A consortium led by the KHNP was selected in July 2024 as the preferred bidder to build the nuclear reactors, beating France's EDF and Westinghouse from the US thanks to its competitive pricing and ability to follow tight construction timelines. While the deal was supposed to be finalized in March this year, it was delayed following complaints filed by EDF and Westinghouse against the decision. But the path to moving forward with the deal was cleared as Westinghouse and KHNP in January reached an agreement to settle the intellectual property dispute, and Czech authorities dismissed EDF appeals in April. The trial operation of the first nuclear unit is set for 2036, with the second to follow shortly after, aligning with the Czech Republic's goal of having 50% of its energy generated by nuclear power by 2050. South Korea's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said that it welcomes the announcement of the official contract signing date and that it will make every effort to ensure a successful signing ceremony. The ceremony is expected to take place in Prague with representatives from KHNP and the CEZ subsidiary, as well as government officials from both countries. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
And despite widespread concerns, South Korea's exports managed to stay in the black in April, rising for the third month in a row. Our Moon Ji-young covers this latest finding.
South Korea's exports grew for the third consecutive month in April, despite the impact of tariff imposed by the U.S., although outbound shipments to the U.S. saw a drop. According to the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy on Thursday, the value of exports last month amounted to $58.2 billion, up 3.7% compared to the previous year. This marked the highest ever for any April. This growth comes as outbound shipments of semiconductors, the country's top export engine, surged by a whopping 17% on year to reach $11.7 billion. This is the highest figure for any April, driven by strong demand for high-value memory semiconductors such as HBM and price increases of DDR4 DRAM chips. Exports of wireless communications equipment, including smartphones, and exports of biohealth products also expanded by a large margin. While exports of steel and ships both increased, shipments of automobiles, another key export item, dropped almost 4% year-on-year. This decline was largely due to weaker demand for internal combustion engine cars and electric vehicles. Regionally, exports to China rose nearly 4% on year on strong demand for smartphones and semiconductors. Exports to the European Union also surged by more than 18%, setting a new monthly record of $6.7 billion. In contrast, outbound shipments to the U.S. decreased almost 7% year-on-year, mainly due to a drop in automobile and machinery exports.
High U.S. tariffs appear to have affected South Korea's exports to the U.S., though the degree of impact differs by sector.
In the midst of global trade uncertainties, some experts highlight the need to increase local production in response to strengthening trade barriers, especially on chips.
Rather than solely insisting on exports, pursuing a strategy of increasing local production, while potentially leading to short-term industrial hollowing out, is a necessary long-term approach to advance our industrial structure.
Meanwhile, the country's imports decreased by 2.7%, driven by a drop in energy imports. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
And U.S. President Donald Trump continues to claim a tariff deal with South Korea is on the horizon, while officials here maintain their cautious tone, clarifying that no deal will be sealed ahead of the June 3rd presidential election. Now, Mr. Trump's latest claim was made via phone to moderators of a televised town hall Wednesday evening, hosted by News Nation. When pressed about a tangible timeframe for tariff deals with U.S. trade partners, Mr. Trump added that he was in fact not in a hurry to rush into any deal as yet. He also went on to reaffirm that, quote, South Korea has been ripping the U.S. off on trade, despite the fact that the U.S. pays for the military. And the Trump administration's tariff policy has taken a tangible toll on America's first quarter economic activity. Findings show the country's GDP contracted by 0.3% on year. And President Donald Trump insists that the former Biden administration is to blame. Our Ian Jin reports.
According to a Commerce Department report released on Wednesday, U.S. GDP in the first quarter of this year contracted 0.3%, marking the lowest GDP since the first quarter of 2022. The latest GDP reading is also lower than what was forecast by economists, which, according to FactSet, was 0.8% growth, still down from the 2.4% growth recorded in the fourth quarter of last year. The greatest cause for this sharp slowdown seems to have been President Trump's trade tariffs. Imports soared 41.3% in the first quarter, which threw the balance of trade off, largely by the rush to bring in imports before the tariffs went up. But President Trump, during a cabinet meeting at the White House, blamed former President Biden for the contraction and even suggested that some responsibility for the next quarter would be Biden's as well, saying that such changes in the economy don't just happen on a daily or an hourly basis. Trump also said in a Truth Social post, quote, "This is Biden's stock market, not Trump's. I didn't take over until January 20th. Stock market volatility ensued following the release of the GDP report. But both the S&P and Dow marked their seventh straight day of gains. The S&P closing up 0.15%, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average added 0.35%. Meanwhile, the Nasdaq Composite dropped 0.09%. The Personal Consumption Expenditures Price Index, the indicator for measuring inflation, stayed unchanged in March after advancing 0.4% in February. In the 12 months through March, the PCE increased 2.3% after rising 2.7% in February last year. Based on Wednesday's Commerce Department data, the economy is holding up for now, but uncertainty is rising as Trump's tariffs could upend the global order as well as the U.S. economy. The latest figures don't actually reflect President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, as those were announced on April 2nd, just after the end of the first quarter. As some of those tariffs have already been paused or modified, analysts are expecting a more pronounced slowdown in growth later this year as consumers and businesses adjust. Meanwhile, President Trump wrote for everybody to be patient, saying the U.S. will soon boom after the tariffs start kicking in and after the Biden overhang is gone. Economists say the tariffs could weaken economic growth and stoke inflation, but analysts still say 1 quarter of negative GDP growth is not itself a sign that a recession is underway. Ian Jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, in other news, the U.S. and Ukraine have sealed a deal that grants the Trump administration access to Ukraine's critical minerals in return for American assistance against Russian invasion. Our Park Hyo-bin has the latest.
A new economic partnership was signed between the U.S. and Ukraine on Wednesday, establishing a joint investment fund focused on natural resource extraction and post-war reconstruction of Ukraine. The agreement, called the Reconstruction Investment Fund, allows both countries to co-invest in Ukraine's critical growth assets, including oil, gas, and rare earth minerals. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said the deal sends a clear message to Russia that the U.S. is committed to a peaceful, sovereign, and prosperous Ukraine. He added that President Trump sees this as a long-term partnership between the American and Ukrainian people. Also, the U.S. Treasury used the phrase Russia's full-scale invasion, marking the administration's first official acknowledgement of Russia's responsibility for the war. The newly signed investment fund will be jointly managed by the U.S. and Ukraine, with neither side holding a controlling vote. Ukraine's economic minister Yulia Sviridenko said the fund aims to attract Western capital for energy and mineral development, while ensuring that resources remain under Ukrainian ownership and control. The partnership will be equal and free of debt obligations to the U.S., with Kyiv overseeing all extraction decisions. In return, Washington will likely provide new assistance, including air defense systems. Earlier on Wednesday, President Trump said the agreement would help the U.S. recover part of the $66.5 billion in military aid it has sent to Ukraine since 2022.
Rare earth is called rare for a reason. And they have a lot, and we made a deal where our money is secure, where we can start digging and doing what we have to do.
However, Sverdenko clarified that the agreement includes no provisions regarding any Ukrainian debt obligations to the United States. The deal was signed days after Trump met Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at Pope Francis's funeral. Trump described the meeting as beautiful and said Zelensky wants to make a deal to end the war. The agreement reflects a growing focus on aligning post-war reconstruction with long-term economic collaboration, a partnership that may shape the next phase of U.S.-Ukraine relations. 박효빈, Arirang News.
On the K-pop front, Stray Kids has amassed over 20 million subscribers on YouTube, becoming the third K-pop act to mark this milestone. Now, following Blackpink and BTS in 2019, the 8-member boy band welcomed this feat this past Wednesday. Stray Kids is currently on a world tour covering over 30 cities, and according to JYP Entertainment, the group is projected to amass the largest audience in K-pop tour history.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In the Middle East, massive wildfires broke out near Jerusalem on Wednesday morning, leading to widespread evacuations and prompting the declaration of a national emergency. The fires erupted in a forested area between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, rapidly spreading due to high temperatures and strong winds. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned the blazes could reach Jerusalem itself. This has forced the evacuation of several communities and the closure of major roads. Memorial Day ceremonies and Independence Day celebrations planned for Thursday have also been canceled. The Israel Fire and Rescue Services declared their highest alert level, mobilizing over 120 firefighting teams, including assistance from the Israel Defense Forces. Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has also sought additional firefighting aid from over a dozen countries. At least 16 people have reportedly been hospitalized for smoke inhalation, although no fatalities have been reported. In Sweden, police have arrested a teenager following a shooting that killed 3 people in the city of Uppsala on Tuesday. The incident has raised concerns about escalating gang-related crimes in the country. On Wednesday morning local time, the authorities apprehended a 16-year-old suspect, with the Swedish prosecution authority confirming that the teen was being held on suspicion of murder. On Tuesday around 5 p.m., a shooting at a hair salon in Uppsala killed 3 men aged between 15 and 20. While the motive remains unclear, the authorities are exploring a potential gang-related connection, as one victim reportedly had ties to organized crime. Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson called the shooting a terrible act and lamented that brutal and ruthless violence was shaking the country. Sweden has seen a rise in violent crimes in recent years, with its worst mass shooting leading to 10 deaths occurring in February. In the United States, Columbia University student and Palestinian activist Mohsen Madawi was released from U.S. immigration detention on Wednesday local time after a federal judge ruled his arrest was unjustified. Madawi, a 34-year-old who has permanent U.S. residency or green card status, was detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement on April 14th during a naturalization interview in Vermont. The Trump administration attempted to deport Madawi under a rarely used statute, alleging his advocacy for Palestinian rights threatened U.S. foreign policy. However, U.S. District Judge Jeffrey Crawford found no evidence that Madawi posed a flight risk or danger and ordered his release. On Wednesday, Guinness World Records revealed that the world's tallest and shortest dogs met for the first time in early April. Facilitated by GWR, Reggie, a 7-year-old Great Dane from Idaho standing at approximately 1 meter, and Pearl, a 4-year-old Chihuahua from Florida measuring just over 9 centimeters in height, met as part of the institution's 70th anniversary celebrations. Despite a huge height difference, the 2 dogs quickly bonded at Reggie's home where the event took place. Reggie, known for his gentle demeanor, was cautious around the tiny Pearl, who, according to the owner, is unfazed by larger dogs and enjoys their company. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
It has been raining quite hard since the morning in Seoul and across the country. With the rain, most of the dry weather advisories have been lifted in the inland areas, but dry weather warnings around the East Coast are still in place. With relatively less rain, please take extra precautions to prevent any fires. In addition, the wind is also on the rise. Currently, gusty winds of more than 20 meters per second have been blowing on the west coast, and a strong wind advisories have been issued. Also, wind wave advisories are in effect around the West Sea and central parts of the East Sea. The wind is expected to be strong across the country. Friday morning will start off at 9 degrees Celsius in Seoul, Gwangju, Daegu, and Gyeongju. Highs will move up to around 20 degrees all over the country. Clear weather will be back tomorrow, but it will rain again on Saturday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up next is our daily panel session.